So I was raised Methodist and was confirmed in the Methodist church when I was in middle school, and then went on to the University of North Dakota, and that was really where I first encountered, in a real way, in a way that was relevant to me, the Catholic Church. My father was raised Catholic, and therefore I had gone to Mass and things growing up sometimes with my grandmother, who was still a practicing Catholic, but it had never really been an option for me to consider the church. I didn't really know anything about what the church taught. I didn't know any of the distinctions, the major distinctions between being Methodist and being Catholic until I was in college. And when I started at UND, I had already been dating a young man in high school for 4 years. That first relationship was my whole world. Growing up in high school, I mean, starting when I was 15, 16 years old. But when I arrived at UND, my freshman RA was a Bible study leader with an organization called FOCUS, Fellowship of Catholic University Students. And the first time I ever went to her Bible study was at Applebee's, celebrating her victory as homecoming queen at UND. So it was just God's providence kind of drew me in through fun and pleasure. And after that night, I started going to attending a Bible study every week. When I really encountered women who didn't need a relationship to define themselves in the way that I did, and who had relationships with each other that were pure and simple and good. That was really my first encounter with that type of holiness that I desired, that I didn't know I desired, but that was the first time I realized I desired it. I entered the church my junior year, and that's, of course, where my vocation begins, in a new relationship with the Eucharist, with the Blessed Mother, with the true church, all of that. I didn't have any plan to be a sister when I graduated from college. In fact, I was very resistant to the idea. But with Focus, we have the great grace of accepting a 1-year dating fast. You commit to 2 years as a missionary with Focus. In the first year, they ask you to do a dating fast, meaning no relationships, no romantic relationships to speak of. When I was going through my conversion and preparing to enter the church, the relationship that I had been in with high school became more and more apparently destructive to my faith. And so as I began to live a life of virtue, I slowly, and I mean slowly, withdrew from that relationship. My identity was beginning to be in Christ, and I was loving that, but he again brought a different man into my life. And so I began another relationship shortly after I entered the church that lasted for about 1.5 years. And that young man was Protestant when we started dating, and as he began RCIA, he also discerned a call to the priesthood. And so I was still in college, thinking about applying to be a Focus missionary, but really mostly desiring to be married and to have a huge Catholic family, the Catholic family that I hadn't been raised in. I wanted to have 12 to 15 kids and just really honor Christ in that way. That was the way I always pictured myself, worshiping our Lord and living out a vocation in the world and really being an evangelist. It wasn't really what God wanted for me. So when that gentleman decided that he wanted to be a priest, I was at first furious with Jesus, mad in every way, and especially because I was living a life in pursuit of holiness, and I thought that I was attached to that plan. I thought that was the best idea. And so that's the kind of the context of my dating fast of the year that I entered into being free from relationships for 1 year. I was placed at Benedictine College in Atchison, Kansas, and being a convert, it was the last school I wanted to be placed. I had actually said out loud I want to go anywhere except Benedictine. And so when I was placed there, it was, again, another one of those encounters with the Lord's plan for me. I having my own ideas and him having entirely different ones. So at Benedictine, I formed incredible friendships with the women that I mentored and were in my Bible studies there. And that spring break of my first year, I led a mission trip to New York City to work with a couple different religious orders. One of the religious orders that we worked with was the Servants of the Lord, which is the community that I belong to now. And we were given the opportunity to go with the sisters, the active sisters that we were working with, to their monastery. The order has a contemplative branch, and meet the contemplative sisters behind a grill. And so that was my first time, encountering that radical gift of self to God. And I was such a mess the whole time. The sisters were behind the grate, and they were reaching their little fingers through to greet their sisters, and I saw a joy and a peace in those sisters that were, quote unquote, in prison. That was the way our world would look at it, that I had never seen anything like that before. And so I was just like a mess. I was weeping and everything, just seeing their gift. And that was, I think I could say that that's the night that Jesus really opened my heart to the consecrated life. But I wasn't quite ready to say yes yet then. I continued on with my time as a missionary in Focus. I began my second year as a missionary, which meant that I was then available. I was no longer on the dating fast. I was available to pursue my vocation if it truly was married life. So then the moment when the second semester of my second year as a missionary, the gentleman who I had dated in college, who had discerned a call to the priesthood, in the meantime had entered the church and had actually discerned a call to the religious life, to consecrated life. But many of the orders that he was looking at entering wouldn't take him until he had been Catholic for a few years. And so while he was waiting to enter, he was diagnosed with an illness that was going to prevent him, he thought, from entering. And so so his response to that was, well, that's a sign that I probably should have married this girl, should have married me. And so he showed up in Kansas, and where I was living, and essentially proposed to me. And so it was. I needed something that dramatic, I think, to really for me to really engage what it was that I actually desired. Because a year and a half previous to that, when I was so mad at God, that would have been exactly what I thought I had wanted. And so then, when after all this time of winning my heart and just really helping me uncover my true identity, like the relationship that I was actually made for, he brought back my old desires and represented them to me, basically, and asked me if I still wanted them. And I didn't want them anymore. And so it was a really it was a really intense realization, I think. And just a side note, I think that is important to encourage anybody at that time, shortly before this offer of marriage, I had finally begun consistent spiritual direction for the first time. And spiritual direction, I just want to throw that out there, its significance, like how important it was for me to have a priest to help guide me through what was going on in my soul. Through prayer and through examination of what was surfacing in my soul, I realized that the only thing I desired was to belong totally to Christ, even if a man of great holiness was inviting me into the vocation of marriage. That marriage wasn't what I was made for. Later that summer, shortly after that happened, I attended my spiritual director's ordination. He was a deacon at the time he was directing me. And at his ordination, when he was laying prostrate in front of the altar, giving himself totally to Christ, that was the moment that I knew that I wanted to do that specifically. I wanted to lay in front of an altar and make an oblation of myself to Christ.